On the night the family patriarch died, his inheritance came into play. But what the four children didn't know was that only those who survived 30 days living as if they'd never had anything would inherit the fortune. The wind was blowing hard through the gardens of the Valmonte estate that night. Inside, something was about to change forever. In the master bedroom, the velvet curtains were partially drawn. The family patriarch, Lord Alistair Valmont, was struggling to breathe. The illness had come on far too quickly. For decades, he had been a man both feared and respected. Owner of vast lands, a considerable fortune, and an influence that reached the most important halls of society. Now, however, all that was left was a frail man in a bed, surrounded by shadows. At his side were Vera, the housekeeper, who had worked for him for many years, the doctor, and also his four children, each one carrying many expectations. Seraphim, the eldest daughter, held her chin high with an almost severe dignity. Celia, the first son, watched his father with an intense gaze, as if he were counting every second. A little farther away was Alira, whose calm expression hid thoughts that no one seemed to understand. And near the window stood George, the youngest. Unlike his siblings, he wasn't watching their father. He was watching the others. The room was completely silent. You could hear every tick of the doctor's pocket watch. Lord Alistair took a deep breath one last time. His eyes slowly passed over each child. He paused for a moment on each one, as if he still had something to say, but he didn't. And then his chest fell and did not rise again. Time of death, 2:47 in the morning, murmured the doctor, closing his watch. None of the children cried right away. They just looked at each other, and Jorge, with special tenderness, looked at his father and said, "Goodbye, Dad." The next day, the four heirs gathered in the main hall. It was the day the will would be read. None of them had slept well. They were anxious to find out who inherited what. Seraphine was impeccable, as always. Dressed in black, with perfect posture, standing tall, her gaze sharp. Celia leaned against the wall with an almost bored expression, but her fingers drummed lightly, betraying a bit of anxiety. Was he gonna stay like that? Sitting with her hands clasped in her lap, and George kept watching each of them. In front of him stood the family lawyer, holding a sealed envelope. In Sarah's corner was Vera, the housekeeper, impeccable as always, and completely still. Lord Valmont always insisted that she be present at all the family's important events, and this was no different. But Vera was not just a housekeeper. She had been in that house for over 40 years. She arrived when she was still young, and when death took the lady of the house, it was Vera who stayed. She was the one who helped take care of each of the children. The one who helped Seraphine when she got her period and became a young lady. The one who tried to rein in Celiana's rebelliousness during her teenage years. It was Vera who sat beside Alira and put her to sleep. And she was also the one who many times carried Jorge in her arms and cared for him as if he were her own son. Sonen. And it was also Vera who helped Lord Valmondo through his toughest times, making sure he never had dinner alone, even if it was in silence. Vera knew his habits. She could tell when he was irritated, even if he didn't say a word. She knew when he needed silence and when he needed company. And she was also there for him on the days when his health quietly began to fail. Without making a fuss, she did it as if she were just fulfilling another one of her duties. And most importantly, she never tried to take anyone's place, never tried to be a mother, but somehow she was present in that house in a way no one else ever was again. And so she stood there, still motionless, in the corner of the room, just listening. "By the instructions of Lord Alistair Valmont," the lawyer began, "this will shall be read in 2 parts. The first, today." Their eyes met, filled with suspicion. "To gain access to the inheritance," he continued, "each of you must complete a task." A slight discomfort swept through the room, and the lawyer's voice echoed. To my children, you are born with privileges you could never understand. Now, for the first time, you will have the opportunity to understand the value of what you never had to earn. In order to receive the inheritance, each of you must complete an individual task for 30 days. Seraphine Valmont, for 30 days, you will work in this house as a regular maid under the supervision of the housekeeper. Cillian Valmont, you will work for 30 days at one of the family businesses as an ordinary employee without revealing your identity. Elira Valmont, you will prepare meals every day for those who have nothing. And Jorge Valmont, you will live for 30 days, as I did when I was young, working in the fields. The children were in complete shock. Cillian stood up quickly and exclaimed, "This is absurd! To receive what is rightfully ours, we have to lower ourselves and—" The lawyer promptly interrupted. "Just a moment, it's not over yet." And he continued reading the will. After 30 days, each of you must choose who put in the most effort. That person will receive a special gift. A special gift. And that sounded good. They looked at each other and smiled. Understanding that, silently, a challenge was about to begin. So the tasks began. The eldest daughter, Seraphine, faced the first day as the most humiliating thing she had ever done. She was given a simple uniform without any hint of luxury. Seraphine held the fabric as if it were something strange. When she started her duties, it was a complete disaster. She dropped trays, missed schedules, broke dishes. The second day seemed unbearable. By the third day, her hands were already marked. The housekeeper who supervised her wasn't cruel, quite the opposite actually. She treated her with dignity and respect. However, no one treated her as Miss Valmonte, just as another maid. The second child, Cillian, joined the company under a fake name so no one would recognize him. Ordinary clothes, adjusted posture. In the first few days, he tried to take charge, giving orders, asserting his presence, but he was quickly corrected. "You're not in charge here," a supervisor told him. And that was something new and humiliating for him. There, he wasn't the owner's son, he was just another regular employee. People weren't afraid of him. More than once, he wanted to ask, "Do you know who you're talking to?" But he immediately remembered that if he didn't complete the task, he wouldn't get the inheritance. So he kept quiet and did what he was told. The third daughter, Elira, started preparing the food. She always cooked in silence. At first, she was a bit restless. She had never cooked before, much less for poor people. But an elderly lady who also prepared those meals gladly helped Elira. She always smiled at her. But Elira could only think about her father, about what he had made her go through. She thought, "I could have arranged this by asking someone else to make the meals. Why did he make me do it? He knew I don't even know how to cook. What's the point of all this?" But those thoughts died inside her head, because Elira always kept silent. Meanwhile, Jorge's fourth child, the youngest, would wake up before sunrise to work in the fields and stay there until the sun went down. The work was tough. He weeded, fed the animals, harvested crops, and on some days, he even milked the cows. The difference between him and his siblings was that he had already done this kind of work before. Many times, while his father was still alive, they would go out to the fields and spend hours there doing manual labor. And with everything he did, he always remembered his father. Not with resentment for having been made to work there, but with a lot of affection. He remembered all the times he had been in that same field with his father, and the stories his father told about his own childhood, and how he wished he could have spent more time with them. Because he was the youngest, Jorge had less time with his father than the others did. However, out of all of them, Jorge was the one who made the most of his father's company. He was the favorite son, and that stirred up a lot of jealousy. During those 30 days, the Valmont household had changed, and in a way, so had they. Seraphine no longer dropped trays. Her hands, once delicate, now bore small marks from work. She moved through the house with precision. She already knew everyone's schedules, routines, and habits. The servants had started to trust her. Some even smiled at her. And for the first time, she wasn't feared for being the master's daughter. She was respected. Cillian, the company, had changed too. Before, he carried himself with pride. That never left him, but he learned to listen. He discovered the weight of meeting deadlines, of making mistakes, and of being corrected. He also learned what it was like to depend on colleagues who neither admired nor feared him. In the last week, someone looked at him and said, "You've improved." And that stuck in his mind for days. But it was Elira who changed the most on the inside. In the beginning, she cooked in silence, out of obligation. Later, she remained silent, but by choice. She started to observe the people who ate her meals. They were children, elderly people, people invisible to the world she knew. But now, in a way, she felt a special connection with these people. And George stayed the same. The work in the fields was still hard, but now there was something different. He no longer did it just in memory of his father, he did it because he wanted to. George had a good heart and understood that his father did it not as a punishment for his children, but because he loved them and wanted to leave one last legacy. And then the big day finally arrived, the day of the final reading of the will, part 2. The four of them gathered in the main room with the lawyer and the housekeeper. Vera was there with them too. "Today," said the lawyer, "you must decide who put in the most effort." There was a silence. They exchanged glances with each other. Seraphine was the first to speak. "I deserve the prize," she said, firmly. "I was put in the most degrading position possible, and even so, I stood strong and overcame everything." Leon laughed dryly. "Oh, please, right? Seraphine, I worked without a name, without power, in an environment that was supposed to be mine. I was the one who endured the most." Elira spoke a little softer, but more firmly. "None of you saw what I saw. None of you understood what I understood. I deserve it." And then the three of them looked at Jorge. He shrugged and just said, "I worked, just like I always have. I don't think this is a competition. But if it is, I believe everyone here deserves it in some way." The siblings rolled their eyes at Jorge's answer and grumbled. "Oh, give me a break," said Cillian. The lawyer spoke up. "All right then, let's find out who really deserves it." He took a box and placed it on the table. Everyone kept their eyes on the box, excited, imagining what it could be. Right? Gold jewelry? The family diamond? The lawyer opened the box and took out a mirror. It was an old, antique, stained mirror with a note attached to it. Confusion filled the room. "Is this some kind of joke?" Seraphine said. The lawyer picked up the note, which read, "This is the only prize you deserve, so you can try to see who you really are." Silence fell like a blade, and then George laughed, a genuine laugh. His siblings looked at him annoyed. "You already knew, didn't ya?" Seraphine accused. "Of course he knew," Cillian added. "He was always the favorite." George raised his hands. "Guys, I didn't know. I worked just like all of you." He took a step forward and picked up the mirror. "The only difference," he finished, "is that I was already familiar with this kind of life. And I knew Dad wouldn't pass up the chance to make one last joke." But as he took the mirror out of the box, a second note appeared underneath, with the inscription, "To my beloved son." Cillian was the fastest. He snatched the paper from Jorge's hands. "I knew it," he said with a huge smile. "I knew Dad wouldn't let me down." He then opened the note and began to read. The note spoke of how proud he was of his son, of the good man he had become, and then at the end it said, "I leave my properties in the care of my beloved son." The one I am most proud of, George. The paper almost slipped from Cillian's hand. George was shocked and moved. This time it was Seraphine who burst out laughing. Cillian didn't know if he was angrier or more embarrassed. He couldn't say a single word. The lawyer then began to read the second part of the will, which said, "To my children, you spent 30 days trying to prove you deserve what you've always had. How I wish I were alive to see this. But most of you never, not even once, tried to be in my presence while I was alive. I spent years waiting for visits that never came, for conversations that never happened. You wanted my fortune, but you never wanted my time." Seraphine looked away. Celia clenched her fists. Elira closed her eyes, and Jorge just listened. The lawyer then continued reading. "Only one of you was with me without any interest, without hurry, and without obligation. That's why I leave my properties to Jorge. The girls are already married, and Celia has her own business, so I know they'll be fine. As for the money, it'll be divided as follows. To Zerfim, Celia and Elira, I leave 10% of my fortune to each of you. And Jorge will get 20% of the fortune. And to my beloved Vera." At that moment, all eyes slowly turned to Vera, who widened her eyes in surprise. Jorge looked at her with special affection. He had once seen Vera with his father, together, kissing, but he never dared to bring it up. He respected them both a lot and realized they wanted to keep it a secret. Jorge saw Vera as a mother figure. At that moment, Vera's eyes filled with tears, but she remained still. The lawyer then continued reading. "To my beloved Vera, I leave the remaining 50% of my fortune and this mansion, where we shared so many happy moments. I also want you to know that my relationship with Vera was kept quiet by choice, not out of shame. I love her deeply. Vera will also keep my little dog Flora, for whom she has a special affection. To my beloved children and to Vera, I kiss to all of you. I love you all." No one could say a word. Everyone was surprised by the will. Cillian was still holding the first note, unable to react. Seraphine was in complete shock. Elira was trying to organize her thoughts. Vera was visibly moved and surprised. And George? George was holding the mirror, looking at his own reflection. Not with pride, nor with triumph, but with understanding. Because in the end, their father hadn't just left them an inheritance. He left something much harder to accept, a reflection of who they were and who they could still become.